He was the king of Macedonia, a military commander, and one of the greatest conquerors in history. Alexander the Great, a man whose victories changed the world and left an indelible mark on history. At 20, he became king, and by the age of 30, his name was known across the world. In this video, you'll learn how the young king managed to defeat mighty Persia and become pharaoh of Egypt. Why, despite the victories he had already won, did he decide to march into India? What secret lay behind his leadership and his relationship with his army? And what really happened on the day of his death? We'll uncover these mysteries and tell the story of a man who changed the fate of entire peoples and entered history forever. Suggest topics for new videos in the comments and subscribe to the channel. Bedtime stories are posted here every day. Childhood and early years. Alexander the Great was born in Pella, the capital of Macedonia, in 356 BC. His birth was no ordinary event, for immediately after he came into the world, unusual, one might say mythic, events occurred. According to ancient Greek chronicles, Alexander's mother, Olympias, heard a loud peal of thunder during labor and saw a bright star flare in the sky. To her, it was a sign that her son would become the greatest of rulers. It's no coincidence that nearly all the legends of his life began to take shape with such images, blending reality with myth. Alexander was not just a man, he was a symbol of greatness, a harbinger of a new era in history. His mother, Olympias, was a woman of strong will and determination. The daughter of the rulers of Epirus, she was an independent figure in her own right. Highly influential, Olympias often stood at the center of political intrigues and clashes, which undoubtedly influenced her approach to raising her son. Her character and her drive to raise him as a great leader were evident in methods that combined resolve, even harshness, with a noble aim, to give him a worthy future. Olympias was consumed by the thought that her son was not merely a future ruler, but someone destined to transform the entire world, like the mythical Heracles, whose feats were the ideals she strove to instill in Alexander. As for Philip II, Alexander's father, his role in his son's life was no less significant. Philip was a commander, a strategist, and the creator of a powerful army that unified Macedonia and extended its influence over neighboring states. He greatly strengthened Macedonian power, turning it into one of the strongest states in ancient Greece. Yet despite his military might and political brilliance, Philip was a man for whom power and ambition often outweighed family bonds. Philip's influence on Alexander was unequivocal. The son saw in his father a great figure, whose success was not a matter of inheritance, but the fruit of hard work, battles, and sacrifices. Philip was not just a warrior, but the architect of Macedonian strength, and this passed on to Alexander, who each year became more aware of his destiny. Despite the press of his father's political and military concerns, the boy was never neglected. A crucial point in Alexander's life was his education under one of the greatest philosophers of the time, Aristotle. This thinker, whose works ranged from metaphysics to astronomy, became the tutor of the future conqueror. Aristotle's teachings in philosophy, politics, science, and culture had a profound impact on Alexander. Especially important were the lessons about a person's role in society and their interaction with the surrounding world. Aristotle taught him that wisdom and power are inextricably linked, that intellect can be as potent a weapon as the sword. This knowledge helped shape Alexander as not only a great general, but also a man capable of changing the course of history with his mind and strategy. But Alexander was not merely a vessel for knowledge. His upbringing also included early military exploits, participation in governance, and duties that required leadership. At just 16, when his father went on campaign, Alexander effectively served as regent in Macedonia. He showed not only decisiveness, but also strategic thinking, suppressing a revolt in Thrace. This victory was the first confirmation of his ability to lead an army and make independent decisions. It was only the beginning, for the real test of his strength and wisdom came later, when Philip returned home and entrusted his son with significant military actions.
With each passing year, his ambitions and drive for leadership grew. Alexander was not a passive heir waiting for his time. He was confident that his destiny was to be the greatest of rulers. Even in childhood, he began to make plans to expand his empire, not yet fully realizing how vast that path would be. His childhood was filled not only with play and study, but with a view of the world through the lens of responsibility for its future. In every act, one could see his striving for excellence, to create a new reality based on his ideas of justice and rule. His role in Macedonian education and political life was not just the product of what Philip gave him, but an echo of his own resolve and ambition. With his early successes and victories, Alexander emerged as someone who not only followed in his parents' footsteps, but sought to go beyond their achievements and create something new. The forging of the future conqueror essentially began before he ever took a sword in hand. His childhood laid the foundation for understanding that he was not merely the son of a king, but the future king of the world.
The start of a military career. As Alexander grew older and more experienced in the art of war, his father, Philip II, decided to entrust him with more serious military tasks. Though still not of full age, Alexander had already been tested in battle, and the results confirmed his strategic thinking and innate ability to fight. His first truly decisive test came at the Battle of Cheranoa in 338 BC. There, Alexander first proved himself as a commander, and the battle played a key role in establishing his reputation and future military career. Cheranoa was a decisive confrontation between the Macedonian army, led by Philip II, and a coalition of Greek poli, primarily Athens and Thebes. The clash was more than just a battle, it was a pivotal moment that determined Greece's fate. An army united by the goal of preserving independence from Macedonian dominance took the field. Greece did not yet realize that its fate would soon be decided not only on the battlefield, but also in political forums. At just 18 years old, Alexander fought on the right flank and commanded the cavalry. At the critical moment, he displayed a composure and strategic cunning rare for his age. When the fighting intensified and the Macedonian army found itself in a difficult position, Alexander launched an unexpected attack. He struck the Theban heavy infantry and broke their ranks, turning the tide. Victory went to the Macedonians. With this baptism by fire, Alexander demonstrated his remarkable abilities not only as a soldier, but as a commander. He won not only the battle, but also the respect of all present, both allies and enemies. Many sources claim that after the battle, Philip looked proudly at his son and said, "My victory could have been nothing without your resolve, my son." Ascending the throne. The death of Philip II, King of Macedonia, was a tragedy that shook not only Alexander, but the entire world his father sought to rule. Philip II was assassinated in 336 BC at the wedding of his daughter Cleopatra, who was marrying Alexander I, King of Epirus. As the king approached the royal seating during the festivities, he was struck by a knife. The killer was one of his bodyguards, Pausanias, who may have acted out of personal revenge or on behalf of others. The murder remains shrouded in mystery. Who stood behind the crime and what the real motives were is still debated. Some point to palace intrigue, others link it to Philip's political opponents unhappy with his reign and foreign policy. At 20, Alexander faced immense responsibility. The loss of his father left a huge wound, and the sudden change in power put the stability of his rule in question. The delicate balance Philip had maintained among internal and external forces threatened to collapse. The new king had to prove he could govern the country and hold on to the influence his father had won with such effort. Alexander had little time to reflect. He immediately set to work. His first task was to establish his authority within Macedonia. Despite his youth, he moved quickly to suppress internal revolts. He boldly put down an uprising in Thrace and secured important border regions. At the same time, he strengthened ties with key figures in the Macedonian elite, winning the support of influential generals and officers. But military victories alone were not enough. He understood his rule would remain in doubt if he failed to legitimize his authority in the eyes of the people and the aristocracy. He gained the backing of major political figures such as Parmenion, an experienced commander who would play an important role in Alexander's future campaigns. Skillfully using both force and diplomacy, Alexander not only quelled uprisings, but also strengthened political unity within the country. From the outset, it was clear his gaze reached far beyond Macedonia. He began to consider how to bolster Macedonian influence abroad and how to deal with the growing Persian threat. His real trial was only beginning, and his future would depend on the decisions he made now.
Conquering Greece, preparing for the Asian campaign. Once Alexander established his power in Macedonia and suppressed the revolts, he could focus on more ambitious plans, subduing Greece and consolidating the Balkans. This was only the first part of a strategy he intended to carry into Asia. Despite political instability, Greece remained central to his imperial ambitions, not only politically but culturally, as the heart of ancient civilization. After securing power in Macedonia, Alexander realized he needed to put his house in order before embarking on larger campaigns. War with the Greek cities that still maintained independence was inevitable. He knew that without fully conquering Greece, he could not claim to be the unifier of all Hellenic polis, and his ambitions would not stop there. But first he had to eliminate internal resistance in Greece. One of the most serious challenges came from Athens, a concentration of political and military forces capable of resisting his plans. Athens, like Thebes, was famous for its independence and readiness to defend it to the death. In 335 BC, while Alexander was in Macedonia, Athenians began to stir. The young king acted decisively. He refused to show weakness and marched on Athens to suppress the revolt. The Athenian forces were defeated, and instead of brutal punishment, Alexander exercised diplomacy, bringing the city under his control. Even so, Greece remained fragmented, and the threat of new uprisings persisted. Alexander understood his strategy had to be political as well as military. His next step was even more decisive and astute. He created the League of Corinth, which became the basis for long-term Macedonian dominance in Greece. The alliance between the Macedonian kingdom and the Greek polis allowed Alexander to unite most of Greece under his control with minimal bloodshed. It was a strategic move that ensured regional peace and strengthened his influence. As hegemon of the League, Alexander became the official leader of the Greek cities. Thus, Greece was unified under his authority, and those polis that had not yet submitted now became part of the coalition beneath Alexander's banner. He showed himself not only as a general, but also as a diplomat, using charisma, persuasion, and force to forge a strong political alliance and strengthen his position as leader of all Greece. But he did not stop there. Securing Greece was only the first step. To aspire to world dominion, he had to look east, toward Asia and powerful, wealthy Persia. Before launching that expedition, he needed to make sure nothing at home could distract him. He began to assemble the best army ever to fight under his command, a balanced force of infantry and cavalry with new tactical elements. The military reforms initiated by his father, Philip II, became the foundation of Alexander's successes and the core of Macedonian superiority. The young king knew that the Persian Empire awaited him in the east. That would be the theater of his greatest battles. Outwardly calm, Alexander was determined to face the Persians, to prove his greatness. His first task was to complete preparations and ferry his army across the Hellespont into Asia, where his great struggle for the world he wanted to build would begin.
The campaign begins, crossing the Hellespont and the Battle of Issus. In 334 BC, one of the most ambitious and decisive phases of Alexander's life began, his Asian campaign. This was the turning point when his dreams, plans, and ambitions took concrete form. Alexander was ready to begin his path to a power unmatched in history, his gaze fixed on the greatest empire of the time, Persia. The reasons for the campaign were clear and layered. Revenge for Persian invasions and Greek defeats like Marathon, the restoration of Greek honor, and, on a personal level, Alexander's ambition to stand on the pedestal of world history. The historian Arrian notes that the first step was the most important. When the army crossed the Hellespont, it symbolized a boundary between two worlds, Europe and Asia. For Alexander and his troops, the crossing marked not just a physical move from one continent to another, but the start of a new epoch filled with great battles, unprecedented trials, and vast opportunities. Alexander prepared to meet a Persian army that outnumbered his own. Even so, the Macedonians were experienced, well-trained, and disciplined, and their commander, facing numerical inferiority, always found ways to prevail. From the outset, he relied not only on military strength, but also on cunning strategies that let him win despite the enemy's apparent advantages. The first key engagement was the Battle of Issus. Issus was not just a place where two armies fought. It was where tactics, genius, and courage set the decisive accent. Darius III fielded a force nearly twice the size of the Macedonians. But Alexander, with relentless determination and military wisdom, knew victory could be won not only by numbers, but by skillful command, using mobility and tactical maneuvers. The Persian army was stretched along a narrow shore, leaving it vulnerable. Alexander used his cavalry to strike the flanks, splitting their defense. Seeing his army falter, Darius fled the field, abandoning his troops. It was a crushing defeat for Persia that confirmed Alexander as a great commander. Yet Issus did not end the struggle. It was only the first in a series of decisive battles that would lead to Persia's downfall. Unlike many commanders, Alexander was not inclined to cruelty after victory. He showed wisdom and restraint, treating Persian captives humanely, even incorporating some into his forces. This was part of his broader strategy to unite conquered peoples and build an empire based on respect and mutual understanding.
The conquest of Egypt, proclaimed as Pharaoh. Alexander next led his army into Egypt, a strategic move, since Egypt, then part of the Persian Empire, was one of the most significant and culturally advanced regions of the time. Weakened and divided, Egypt was poorly maintained by Persia. Alexander met little resistance. Weary of Persian rule, the Egyptians welcomed him as a liberator and new ruler, expecting neither cruelty nor persecution. Unlike other territories where he faced hard fighting, Egypt opened doors full of opportunity. The local priesthood, seeing a new sovereign, offered to proclaim Alexander pharaoh. This title mattered not only as recognition of his power, but also as a way to consolidate his status in Egypt and among other peoples. As pharaoh, Alexander accepted not only political authority, but also religious responsibility, becoming the link between gods and humans. For Egyptians, their new ruler was not merely a worldly king, but a divine figure, which earned him even greater respect. Alexander seized this chance to solidify his position and soon founded a new city, Alexandria, intended not only as a strategic hub, but as a symbol of the union of East and West. The city was planned as a center of science, trade, and culture, where Greeks and Egyptians could coexist and different traditions could blend. The future lighthouse of Alexandria would become one of the 7 wonders, and Alexandria itself one of the greatest cities of the world, leaving its mark for centuries. He took part in ceremonies underscoring his new status, honored Egyptian gods, and emphasized his bond with them. This integration into Egyptian religion and culture bolstered his authority and eased acceptance of his rule among Egyptians, who sought familiarity with their traditions and symbols in the new king. Alexander also used these events to shape his image, not only as a conqueror, but as a great ruler, able to unite and honor different cultures. His respect for Egyptian culture and religion strengthened his rule in Egypt and secured long-term support across his dominions. His strategy ran deeper than battlefield victories. To found a single empire, one had to harmoniously integrate many cultures. Realizing Egypt's importance for his future, he began building a new capital that would become a cultural and scientific center. Alexandria was conceived as a city where Greek culture intertwined with Egyptian, a meeting place for the best minds of East and West, a symbol of a new world where ideas and commerce flowed freely and cultural diversity formed the basis of prosperity. With his power secured in Egypt and construction underway in Alexandria, he pressed on. The Egyptian success was a milestone on the road to further conquests, providing resources, a strategic base, and a powerful symbol of his ability to rule and unite diverse cultures.
Persia's fall, the Battle of Gaugamela. Advancing through the eastern territories, Alexander approached the decisive moment of his campaign, the final obstacle to world supremacy. The Persian Empire under Darius III remained his most powerful enemy. Though Darius had already suffered defeat at Issus, he still commanded vast resources and superior numbers, making Gaugamela a matter of life and death for both Persia and Macedonia. Seeing the threat, Darius assembled his greatest army, by various estimates between 100,000 and 200,000 soldiers, including infantry, cavalry, and war elephants. The forces were diverse: elite Persian units, mercenaries, and allies from regions under Persian control. Despite his numerical advantage, Darius made a strategic mistake that led to his defeat. He chose an open plain at Gaugamela, giving Alexander space to use maneuver and mobility to offset inferior numbers. An experienced commander, Alexander planned to strike the flanks where the Persians were most vulnerable. As the Persians deployed and tried to envelop the Macedonians, Alexander shifted his forces with exceptional flexibility, using his cavalry to launch sudden flank attacks. The enemy began to lose control and cohesion. The key moment came when Alexander led his heavy cavalry straight through the Persian center toward Darius himself. Seeing his armies collapse and fearing for his life, Darius fled. His escape proved disastrous. Panic spread, and the Persian army broke. After Gaugamela, Alexander's forces advanced with little resistance, while Persia's power rapidly disintegrated. The victory represented more than enemy casualties. It was also the triumph of an idea. Alexander proved that cunning, mobility, and strategic flexibility could defeat even superior numbers. The next steps were the capture of Persian cities, including Susa and Persepolis, the latter becoming a symbol of Persia's fall. The destruction and burning of Persepolis's palaces and temples served as retribution, especially for the burning of Athens during the Persian Wars, and as a powerful sign that the old order had ended. Though the city was destroyed, its legacy endured, and Alexander assumed responsibility for the future of those lands. With Persia broken and its capitals taken, he felt his power had become absolute. The East lay open before him, and the army that had defeated the mightiest foe of its age could now march on. He stood on the threshold of the greatest conquests and an unparalleled empire.
The Indian Campaign, Hydaspes, and a break with the army. After completing the conquest of Persia and securing vast territories, Alexander looked further east. India, with its ancient civilization and powerful kingdoms, became his next ambitious goal. For Alexander, India was more than a new region on the map.
It symbolized the continuation of his dream of subduing the known world. In 326 BC, his army reached the Hydaspes River, where he faced one of the strongest local rulers, King Porus. Porus was renowned for courage, discipline, and war elephants that made his army especially formidable. His forces held a position on a high bank, counting on tactical advantage. Alexander showed his genius by ferrying part of his troops across at an unexpected point, distracting the enemy and attacking from the flank. The Battle of the Hydaspes was one of the toughest of his career. Despite Porus's numerical superiority and fortified position, the Macedonians won. Porus was captured, but Alexander, impressed by his bravery, spared him, restored him to his throne, and even expanded his domain, an example of the integrationist policy Alexander increasingly pursued. Yet the Indian campaign proved a turning point. The army, exhausted by years of marching, battles, and harsh climates, began to lose morale. After Hydaspes, on the eve of a possible advance towards the Ganges, open discontent flared. The soldiers, who had marched thousands of kilometers, demanded to go home. For the first time, Alexander faced a refusal to follow him further. He tried to persuade them, speaking of new lands, riches, and glory, but the troops' fatigue outweighed his charisma. He was forced to order a return, a heavy blow not just to a conqueror, but to a man whose dream remained unfulfilled. Even so, he did not see it as defeat. He focused on consolidating his rule over the lands already won. Returning to Babylon, Alexander continued to develop the administrative system of his empire, integrating the cultures of East and West and laying the groundwork for the Hellenistic world. Though the Indian venture did not end as he intended, it showed that his strength lay not only in conquest, but also in recognizing limits, adapting, and maintaining control even when dreams of further advance were crumbling. Far from diminishing his legend, this episode gave it human depth. Return to Babylon. Policy and personal conflicts. After the Indian campaign and the long return, Alexander found himself in Babylon, both the heart of his empire and the center of transformations that would determine the future of his conquests. Babylon became the place from which he planned to govern and to confront new internal problems. There he envisioned continuing his rule, but stood to face not only political challenges, but personal conflicts that had become part of his life. In the first months after returning, he focused on strengthening his authority. As the major center of the Eastern Empire, Babylon was where he decided to build a new, even mightier capital, blending the best traditions of East and West. His vision of how the empire should look underpinned the construction of palaces, temples, and administrative centers. He sought to unite different cultures and peoples, embedding elements of both Greek and Eastern traditions into imperial life. But integrating East and West was not as simple as it seemed. Creating a unified empire required more than administrative reform and new cities. Alexander faced resistance from local rulers and within his own army. Many Macedonians rejected the Eastern rituals he introduced, such as obeisance to the king as a divine being, which became part of his public image. This led to conflicts with generals and intimates, such as Parmenion and Hephaestion, who began to doubt the path chosen by their leader. Relations with Parmenion, one of his most experienced and respected commanders, grew increasingly tense. A proponent of the traditional order, Parmenion did not share Alexander's adoption of Eastern religious practices and quasi-divine status. He believed that in moving east, Alexander was drifting from his Greek roots and Macedonian heritage, prompting serious disagreements between them. Problems also arose within the army.
Veterans who had marched through countless battles began to feel less essential as Alexander increasingly relied on new advisors and courtiers, further aggravating discontent. He continued integrating Eastern elements, often provoking friction with a command that felt increasingly alienated from the new reality. Special attention should be paid to his relationship with Hephaestion, Alexander's closest friend. Their bond was both personal and political. Hephaestion was among the few who supported Alexander's drive to unite cultures and build a new order based on a synthesis of East and Western traditions. Even so, differences arose over the extent of these changes and their impact on the army and Macedonian society. Conflicts with generals and intimates, internal doubts and challenges within the army became part of Alexander's life. He realized that to maintain power, he needed not only to win battles, but also to balance personal ambitions with the demands of governing a multicultural empire. His ideal of a universal empire ran up against a reality in which those closest to him did not always agree. This was a period of deep reflection. With every victory, he strengthened his power. With every decision aimed at uniting East and West, he faced fresh resistance. His ambitions created one of history's greatest empires, but also brought personal and political crises that demanded not only military strength, but wisdom in rule.
Alexander's death and the myths around it. Alexander's conquests, political decisions, reforms, and ambitions changed the world. Yet in 323 BC, at the age of 32, his life ended. His death in Babylon shocked not only those close to him, but the entire ancient world. In life as in death, Alexander remained surrounded by myths and mysteries. In his final months, he felt his strength ebb, his health worsened. Outwardly, he remained a leader, but his body suffered from an illness that grew steadily more evident. Ancient writers report a severe fever that intensified over time. Some sources say he complained of unusual pains, possibly symptoms of an infectious disease. His condition may have also been linked to overexertion, constant stress, and exhaustion. Rumors grew. Physicians could not give a precise diagnosis, and many believed poison was to blame. Suspicions of betrayal gained currency, centering on his top generals such as Antipater or Perdiccas. The uncertainty fed theories of a political plot. Later research suggests that Alexander likely died of disease. Many factors, from mental strain to the conditions in Babylon, may have contributed. Heat and humidity, poor diet, physical stress, triggers for infections such as malaria or typhoid. His death was a catastrophe not only for his empire, but for ancient civilization as a whole. It became clear that the world he built would not survive without his leadership. His influence on subjects and Eastern politics was so great that his death instantly generated myths, the most famous being that he left no clear instructions about succession. Legend has it that when asked who should inherit the empire, he replied simply, "To the strongest." That phrase became the symbol of the struggle for power that led to the disintegration of his empire. The fight for his legacy began immediately. With no obvious heir, his generals, the Diadochi, moved to divide the empire. Without the personal charisma and leadership that had held it together, unity was impossible. Myths and theories about his death multiplied: poison, illness, political machinations. The very speed with which rumors spread speaks to the magnitude of his personality. Over time, many stories about his last days arose, some claiming he clung to power to the end, others that he faced death prepared. The poisoning theory remained popular in later literature, and the tragedy of his end only made him more legendary. Thus, Alexander's death was not merely a tragedy, but the beginning of a new era of myths and riddles that still draw the attention of historians and researchers.
Alexander's legacy, influence on the world and his successors. When Alexander died, his conquests from Greece to India became symbols of greatness and ambition. Yet, despite their vastness, his empire did not remain united for long. Instead, it fragmented in a struggle for power. Even so, Alexander's legacy continued to shape the world for many years. He changed not only the political map, but also had a deep effect on culture and science that flourished under the aegis of his conquests. His aspiration to unite East and West appeared not only in political decisions, but also in cultural efforts. The founding of numerous cities, most famously Alexandria in Egypt, was part of his strategy to spread Hellenistic culture. These cities became centers of science, philosophy, art, and trade, places where cultures met and the ancient world advanced. A powerful element of his policy was Hellenization, the spread of Greek culture across conquered lands. Raised in the spirit of Greek philosophy, art, and science, Alexander sought not merely to conquer, but to integrate local cultures into a Hellenistic framework. He actively promoted Greek customs, built cities, and used Greek as an administrative language. At the same time, he respected and adapted local traditions, fostering better relations with the peoples he subdued. The most important result was a cultural and intellectual network that united Eastern and Western values. In Alexandria arose one of antiquity's largest libraries, and the city became a center of Hellenistic science and philosophy. Scholars such as Eratosthenes, Archimedes, Ptolemy, and many others flourished there, their works profoundly influencing later scientific development. Although Alexander created a cultural bridge between East and West, his ambitions did not lead to a durable political union. His death left a vacuum filled by the Diadochi, Seleucus, Ptolemy, Antigonus, and others who carved up the empire. Despite the political breakup, cultural influence endured. Hellenistic culture did not vanish with the empire's division, it continued to develop in the realms of his successors. The Seleucid Empire and the Ptolemaic dynasty became the principal heirs to Alexander's political and cultural legacy. Seleucids ruling much of Persia and Central Asia, spreading Hellenistic ideas there, and the Ptolemaics in Egypt, where Alexandria became a foremost cultural and scientific center. These dynasties played key roles in advancing Hellenistic civilization, its culture, art, and science. Thus, despite the empire's dissolution, Alexander's legacy went far beyond his conquests. His culture, philosophy, and ideas lived on in the regions he had taken and exerted enormous influence on the evolution of the ancient world. Thanks to Alexander, Greek culture and philosophy spread far beyond Greece, and he became a symbol of how seemingly incompatible worlds could be brought together. Epilogue. Alexander's dream of a single empire did not fully come to pass, but it inspired future rulers and thinkers. The Hellenization he began formed the foundation for the development of Greek culture, which influenced Rome, and through it, the entire Western world. Roman emperors adopted many Hellenistic elements, building a powerful empire that in turn transmitted that tradition across Europe and beyond. Alexander himself remains a towering historical figure, his name a byword for grandeur and ambition. His conquests an example of a military genius's unparalleled resolve. More than 2 millennia later, the name of Alexander the Great still evokes awe and respect. He became the archetype of the great commander who not only defeated enemies, but left behind a world where different peoples met and united. His ideas, dreams, and achievements continue to live in humanity's memory, an essential part of the world's historical and cultural heritage. Though his empire fell apart, its influence endured,
not only in politics, but in science, art, and philosophy. An indelible part of humanity's further development that even the empire's collapse could not erase.